Okay, we're getting started. Thank you all for being here. I'm Karen Grunberg. I am the Israel Studies Faculty Coordinator in the Schusterman Center for Jewish Studies here at UT Austin, and I direct the Center for Middle Eastern Studies, and I work in Hebrew literature in the Department of Middle Eastern Studies here at UT Austin. I am very happy to welcome you here today to our annual Tarbut event. This event is part of a series in Israel Studies at the Schusterman Center for Jewish Studies called Tarbut, Hebrew Arts and Culture. The series brings a well-known Israeli author, filmmaker, or other cultural figure to UT annually to present a public lecture, a reading, or a screening, and to engage more intimately with the UT community through events such as writing workshops or roundtable discussions. The series aims to showcase the diversity of Hebrew and Israeli culture. Today's event is titled Translating Hope, Israeli poet of the working class Yudit Shahar in conversation with her translator Aviya Kushner. It's sponsored by Israel Studies at the Schusterman Center for Jewish Studies. I would also like to thank our co-sponsors, the Program in Comparative Literature, the Center for Middle Eastern Studies, and the Department of Middle Eastern Studies here at UT Austin. And now I would like to introduce our guests for today. Yudit Shahar, sitting next to me, has been writing poetry since the age of 7. Born and raised in the Hatikva neighborhood in Tel Aviv, and Hatikva means hope, she teaches special education and works with marginalized populations in Israel. She's best known for her concern with economic justice and now lives in Petah Tikva, Israel. Her first book, It's Me Speaking, published in 2009, was awarded the Teva Prize and the David Levitan Prize. Her second book, Every Street Has Its Own Mad Woman, published in 2013, won the prestigious Prime Minister's Prize in Hebrew Literature. Her third collection, Holy Illusion, was published in January of 2021. Aviya Kushner grew up in a Hebrew-speaking home in New York. She's the author of Wolf, Lamb, Bomb, a poetry collection deeply engaged with the book of Isaiah that was named a new and noteworthy title by the New York Times and won the Chicago Review of Books Award in Poetry, as well as the Grammar of God, a National Jewish Book Award finalist and Sammy Rohr Prize finalist, about the experience of reading the Bible in English after a lifetime of reading it in Hebrew. She is the Forward's language columnist and an associate professor at Columbia College Chicago, where she directs the MFA program in creative writing. Welcome.
Thank you.
So just to let everyone know, I'm going to ask a few questions, and we're going to have a little conversation with our guests. And then Yudit and Aviya will read some poetry in Hebrew and in English translation, and then we should have some time for questions and discussion. Okay, so we're ready to get started?
Yeah.
So I begin with a few questions for Yudit. Tell us how you started writing poetry. Was there anything in particular about your childhood, for example, or your upbringing that led you to writing poetry, since you started writing at the age of 7?
Well,
For the recording.
it happened naturally. I was 7 years old. I was sitting and playing in the sand, and I was also singing the poems. I find myself singing 2 poems, and then I told myself, oh, wow, I really know how to do this. So when I grow up, I will be a poet. But when I think about it now, when I'm older, so I grew up quite lonely because I'm the 4th daughter of my parents, and my sisters, they are much more older, and I'm very nervous speaking with you because it's my first time ever speaking in such an event in English, so I can forget words, and I make all the time I speak about them all the time, about the catastrophe that will happen to me if I will forget the words. So you must understand that I'm really, really nervous all the time. You know, it is the thing, and so. Well, I was the 4th daughter, and they are much older. So I was and they were my parents were very poor, so they did not have money to put me in the kindergarten. It cost money in those days. So I was quite alone most of the time. Maybe, and after that, when I begin to play with other children, so I always find myself a little bit outsider. So maybe it helped also. I always felt like looking standing from the side and looking at the events until today. It never changes.
Sorry, it's so awkward passing this back and forth. No, but that's very interesting, because then, of course, you associate that position of somebody who's on the outside looking in, the spectator, someone who's watching, that has something to do with your attraction to poetry. Yeah. Maybe. So you're often called the social justice poet of Israel, because many of your poems engage with poverty and with marginalized people, and in your non-poet life, these are also issues that are important to you. Can you tell us a little bit about your interest in social justice and your feelings about being known as a social justice poet, and also whether you feel that these subjects, social justice, that these subjects that are poverty and things like that they are common in Hebrew poetry? Do you feel like what you're doing is a departure?
Well, when I was 40, I got divorced. I had 2 little children. I wanted to do something meaningful, and I changed my occupation to special teacher. English is okay.
Special education.
Thank you. And then there was no jobs at that time, because the government fired teachers. So I found myself with 2 little children and no work. And I began to do many occupations, like in service,
Customer service.
just to survive, okay? And then I told myself, it's not logical that there won't be any poems about, the realism, the realism of the day, how to survive, how can you live with minimum wage, and that's how it began. And at that time, there was no poetry like that. The first reward after I had my first book just said that it's the first time that somebody is speaking, a poet is speaking about the realism of the day. And it's an honor for me when people say it like, how you say, tzedek חברתי?
Social justice.
Yeah, it's really an honor for me.
So, social justice in Israel, as in the U.S., isn't just about class, right? We've talked a little bit about poverty, about unemployment, but it's also about questions of identity, right? So, can you tell us whether your own identity as a Mizrahi woman has played a role in your poetry, and sort of Mizrachiyut, and of course also the question of Arab versus Jew in Israel, and the politics of the conflict, and those also involve the questions of Israeli identity, right? So what role, if any, do those play in the poetry that you write, or in your sort of being a poet and a social justice poet?
Both of my parents, they immigrated to Israel from Turkey. And my father, he was very patriotic person. And I grew up in a family that it was a sad family. When I said that I grew a lot alone, I didn't say that it was a very sad family, because my parents, they did not manage. They really hated them, each other. It was really hell, that house. But my mother, she couldn't leave him, because in these traditional families, my mother couldn't work. So she did not have salary, and she couldn't leave him. She was in a cage with him. And that's what I learned, that I should, and that I must learn, and that I must, of course, have an occupation. And I was always looking as a young child at the ספרות מערבית.
Western literature.
And that's what helped me. Like, you have like Anne from the Gables.
Anne of the Green Gables.
Yes. And other culture, like Sweden culture, and that gave me hope, because I learned another way of life. I learned that I can do anything, that I can be anything, or whatever I like to be. And that's why I found myself, it's a little bit, I wrote it. Can I write? Can I read?
Sure.
Yeah, because now I'm really nervous and I don't find the words at all. Okay, I wrote it, and how it combines everything, me and, okay.
I love this with the role models, those little girls from those children's books.
Yeah.
Yeah, where is it? Here it is. Okay, so the first thing about the immigration and my parents, I already said. My mother couldn't leave him. For the reason, I chose the Western feminist view from childhood. The hope given to me by Western children literature, as I told you as so, that's what helped me growing up, okay, with hope. The Western concept of human and civil rights shaped my perception of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Okay, now I go outside, not only for me, but the conflict. I oppose the Israeli policy in the territories, and ashamed of it. For years I fought and hoped that we would withdraw from the territories that we conquered in exchange for peace. But in practice, the right-wing governments are deepening the occupation, and they are now trying to turn the democracy in Israel into a theocratic dictatorship. I'm sorry.
Theocratic dictatorship.
Thank you. I'm part of the resistance movement that is taking place these days in Israel. So that's what I meant. It combines the two things, because if you believe in human rights, so it's not human right only for Yudit Shahar, okay? It's human right for everyone. And in this case, I am, me and many people like me in Israel, we grow all the time believing that peace will come, that the government will do something. It doesn't happen. So I can only oppose. I can only go to demonstrations. I can...
So that's very interesting, and I wonder, because there are so many intersections of different sort of aspects of your identity that you discussed. So as a young girl and a woman, the clash with this traditional Turkish household, right? But I wonder, you say that you're part of the resistance, you go out and you demonstrate that you're ashamed of the policies of the Israeli government. So is that something that comes into your poetry, into your existence as a poet?
Of course,
Mm-hmm.
of course. I also write political poems. Not in this book. I think I have a few, but in the other books, if you speak about justice, so justice is not only for me. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Yudit. I have a few questions for Aviya.
Thank God.
You're done. You're done. Aviya, you're a poet in your own right, as well as a translator. What attracted you to Yudit's poetry? So let's start with that. What attracted you to Yudit's poetry?
Sure. Hi, everyone. First of all, it's such a delight to be here. So the first thing that I noticed about Yudit's poetry that really got to me in my heart was its rebelliousness. There was this real feeling, there was a gutsiness to her work that I appreciated and loved, and I identified with, even though we come, in some ways, we come from very different backgrounds. My family's not Turkish, for example, but in other ways, there were aspects of Yudit's experience that I knew well. So, for example, we both grew up in a home that was religious to some extent, and I recognized the rituals, the prayers, the language, and the conflict of being a woman in that situation. So I recognized that. I also, actually, the person who first called me to, I would say, harass me into translating Yudit's book. I was laughing about this. Okay, I was on book deadline, and she called me every single day. She called me every single day to say you have to translate this. I'm like, I'm gonna. Okay, but I started my career as a financial journalist, and so I spent, which is something people don't always expect. So I spent a lot of time writing about debt and its consequences, and that is unusual in the poetry world. So I was really moved by a poetic discussion of money. I thought that was something that was needed. It's something that's rare also in American poetry. So I really appreciated that. And at the same time, there was a loveliness to Yudit's work. There's just a beauty in the way that she writes about loneliness and about hope together. So that was what really drew me in. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
I can't remember. Did I answer all your questions?
That was just the first one.
Okay.
Can you tell us how you feel your work as a poet informs your work as a translator?
Sure. So to me, translation is part of a poet's education. And so many of the great poets throughout time have also been translators. There's a wonderful essay by John Dryden translating Virgil. And so Celan was a big translator. So there are so many great poets who translated throughout time. And I think that, of course, hopefully you go to school, but at a certain point you finish. And then what do? How do you keep teaching yourself? So for me, translation is my way of continuing to learn. Mm-hmm. And I think there's something about hearing another person's music that's really, really deeply helpful. So when you're writing your own work, you sort of may be vaguely aware of something like a comma, right? You're sort of vaguely aware. But when you're translating someone else, you really have to think about that. And that's just a way to bring yourself back, I would say, to a childhood sense of the language when you're still learning. Mm. And it's really wonderful. Mm. Yeah, so.
And you've experienced both, of course, writing your own work and
I've experienced both. And I've always written poetry, like Yudit. Mm. I've always written poetry. Something I'll say about Yudit's work, I think, is that, how do I say this? I think contemporary Israeli poetry has a different sense of womanhood than contemporary American poetry. And that has been very freeing for me and very interesting to see. So that's been lovely.
How so? Can you?
How so? I think that the discussion of sexuality is different. I think the discussion of freedom is more open and more. I think there's a greater awareness in contemporary Israeli poetry about, frankly, how hard it is to be a woman, and especially how hard it is to be a woman writer. Mm-hmm. That's something, you might not notice it, because if you go to, let's say, AWP, which is the biggest creative writing conference, I think it's fair to say 60 or 70% of the people there are female, right? But if you start looking at who publishes in the best places, who's at the top, mm-hmm. It's very slanted the other way. And you don't really realize that until you're deep in, or until you're the only woman in the room. Or early in my career, I'll just share, I got an email from an editor, and it was a acceptance, and it was something like, dear Mr. Kushner, we like this. And I wrote back and I said, thank you so much for accepting my work, but just so you know, I'm a woman. And the person actually wrote back, dear Ms. Kushner, you write like a man. And that stuck with me. Like, I was like, who is he? Who would do that, right? Right? So I just think that that's something that Israeli women writers, I think maybe the discrimination is more overt or something, whatever it is, but I feel there's more awareness of that in Israel. And for me, it's been freeing to just being able to say, you know what, you're right, this does exist, as opposed to somebody saying, this doesn't happen.
I want to say, תגידי איך אומרים העורך של עיתון הארץ, the editor, העורך הספרותי.
Yeah, the
literary
cultural
editor
of Haaretz. Haaretz is the most important newspaper in Israel.
Yeah, I don't give him my poems and all my feministic, the feministic poets. Yes. Sorry, because he wrote things like don't give the woman pens to write. I don't send him, okay? So it's really something that living in the...
And maybe we can, of course, if there's anything, if I'm moving too quickly through my questions, we'll have time if anybody wants to pursue any of these topics in the discussion as well. Aviya, can you tell us about special joys and special challenges of translating Hebrew and of translating poetry? And you can talk about them together or separately.
Sure. I love this question. Thank you. I love this question. So Hebrew is my first language. So for me, working with Hebrew poetry is always about going home. It's about the first words I ever heard, and that is always a pleasure for me to find a way to continue. I would say that Hebrew I'll do the challenges first and then the joys, okay? So just on a technical level, Hebrew is a gendered language and English is not. So you have to think about, an object like a table. In English, you don't think, is this a masculine table? Is this a feminine table? But that is true in Hebrew, right? So that's something that's can be challenging to convey. I think that what's more difficult on a technical level is that in Hebrew, it's very easy to rhyme because masculine plurals in Hebrew generally rhyme and feminine plurals in Hebrew generally rhyme. That's not true obviously that's not true in English. But internal rhyme is sometimes easier to achieve in Hebrew as well. Okay, so the rhyme within a line. So those are things that make the Hebrew language beautiful, that you can hear in the Tanakh, in the Bible, but it's not always easy to move it over into English. So that's a challenge. The greatest challenge, which to me is also the joy of translating from Hebrew, is that Hebrew is both an ancient language and a modern language. And that's exciting. It means that the language of the Tanakh, the language of the Bible, the language of the prayers, not so much in Yudit's work, but some other poets, you'll hear medieval Hebrew as well. Mm-hmm. But for in Yudit's work, there are citations, quotations from the Bible, from the prayers, from Jewish thought, from, things that... And one of the challenges is how do you bring that over into English if it's something that every Hebrew speaker knows? How do you convey that to an English reader? How do you do that? If it's something rare, how do you convey that? So that can be a challenge. Also, sometimes something can sound cheesy in English and profound in Hebrew, and that's been one of my challenges. How do I do that? I will say that. In terms of translating poetry in general, I'm on team Walter Benjamin, who feels that only a poet can translate poetry. So it's different from translating prose. I've done them both. What you're basically doing is you're writing a poem in response to a poem. Mm-hmm. It's not exact. And when Yudit and I worked together, I spent a lot of time just reading out. She read out loud to me in Hebrew multiple times. Of course, I can read the Hebrew, but I wanted to hear how it sounded to her. I wanted to hear what she's emphasizing when she reads out loud. And then similarly, I read to her many, many times in English, often with different options, this word, that word, and I tried to explain what's the difference, because to me, the most important thing is the sound, getting the sound. And that's something that I think is significantly more important in poetry than in prose. Mm-hmm. So it's both a joy and a challenge.
I love that answer. Yeah. When I when I asked the question, I didn't expect the answer to be the same for the joys and the challenges. So that was, you got me there. No, that was wonderful. Thank you. So this is my final question, and we'll transition into the readings of the poems. So to both of you, is there a poem, one of Yudit's poem, that holds a special place in your heart? And why?
Who wants to go first?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Yudit will read in Hebrew, and you'll read the English translation.
Okay,
Okay.
but
Should I
what shall no, because we don't have the same
We don't have the same
poem,
one. That's right.
the same one.
That's right.
So we will read I will speak about the second song that we will read. It's called Zoni Medaberet. It's me speaking. I don't know. Well, nothing special happened. I just want to say that, like many poems that I write and then I throw away, this one, it's speaking. I think it's the most famous one of mine. And it took me 1 year thinking about how I want to bring life in the שירות לקוחות.
Customer service.
In the car, how shall I bring את היום-יום? The reality of the, and after I thought about it 1 year, yeah, and when it came out, when it comes, like rain, and I hated myself. I said, how can you write this shit? You're thinking one year and then you write this terrible. And I left it. And then I saw how much people like this poem. So that's what I wanted to tell you, that sometimes you really don't know. And now, many years after that, I sometimes say, well, it's not so bad. But it's true.
That's lovely. I'm going to break the rules a little bit, and I'll list two favorites, if that's okay. So the first is the first poem that you're going to hear. It's I Am Yudit. Let me also say that we have two additional complete copies of the Hebrew and English, if anyone would like them. So I Am Yudit was the first poem of Yudit's that I translated, and we were talking about this before, but it had a word in there. It was a description of Tzrif. It was the home that Yudit grew up in, and I was having trouble getting the exact word right. Should it be hut? Should it be like I tried to figure out what it was. Shack. I finally got to shack, and she was trying to explain. She was describing her home, and I don't know. It wasn't working. Whatever wasn't working, and so what I did was, I took a field trip and I went to Shchunat Tikva, to the neighborhood that Yudit grew up in.
She only told me this yesterday.
Yeah, she didn't know. She didn't know. That's what I did. Because we didn't know each other, and she was trying to describe the home that she grew up in, and and I really I had a couple of English options, but whatever, it just wasn't working. I didn't like any of them, and so I was like, I'm getting nowhere. I'm going to take a field trip, and so I went to the neighborhood where she grew up, and in English it means the neighborhood of hope, and I looked for old ladies. And I stopped them on the street, and I said, what's a tzrif? Like, can you describe? And they immediately said, oh, those don't exist here anymore. Yeah. And that was really helpful for me, because I knew that whatever she was describing was something I had not seen. So it was something that was common in the 1950s, but was no longer around. And then the ladies were like, so I was like, oh, can you tell me a little bit about it? They're like, of course. And they're like, well, the main thing is there wasn't a real floor. And so they started to talk about the difficulty of keeping a place like that clean. It was very interesting. And so you'll hear in the first poem, that helped me understand Yudit. I think when you're translating, there's the dictionary meaning, right? There's the poetic meaning. Like, I was thinking, is this an image? Is this a dream? But then I realized there's the personal meaning for Yudit. There's her meaning, and that might not be. And so those ladies helped me understand that floor built on sand. They really helped, and they helped me get it. And at other points, there were questions I was too embarrassed to ask, and so I just went and asked.
I didn't know this.
She didn't know this, yeah. They were like too racy to ask, and I just wanted to be 1,000% sure that I was right, so I would just go to cafes in Tel Aviv and look for the coolest looking barista and ask, and I got a lot of free coffees. So that was. So I always am attached to that poem because I feel like it helped me see Yudit's world, and once I understood the floor situation, I got the book, which I know sounds weird. I got the whole book just from that one conversation with these ladies. And the other one I was just going to say briefly is a poem called The Loneliness of Loneliness. And it's really beautiful. Can we do a pre-reading before the reading? Is that bad? Or we could just start. Yeah, so maybe we'll read that last. It's a short poem. Maybe we'll close with it. It's a very short poem, but I felt that what connects Yudit's personal poetry and her social poetry is this awareness of loneliness. And even in the social protest poetry, there's a real loneliness to being a minimum wage worker and not being able to get to the end of the month and having nobody around you care. As at the same time, there's a feminine loneliness I think that she captures really well, a childhood loneliness. So I just thought this brief poem called The Loneliness of Loneliness really embodies all of that for me.
And I must say that I'm really very, very lucky that God brought me, maybe I don't know who, nearly, this amazing, really, it's not common, and it's really like a miracle that somebody really tried to understand everything, and she can understand from the Hebrew side and the religious side also, and for many it's unbelievable, really. Thank you.
We commune.
Yeah, it's a great relationship, and there are all these spheres of knowledge, and even though there's a difference in upbringing and so on, it's still
right. So on the one hand, I would say we have a different identity, but on the other, right, we share so many of these other layers, and we're grateful to the person who saw it.
I'm very grateful.
Yeah.
So I'll begin to read in Hebrew. Ani Yudit means me, Yudit. It's the first poem that opens my first book. Okay, so it's some kind of identity. Okay, so the story of my identity. Okay.
Oh, I can do this. Yeah.
Okay. No, I think she meant I don't need it. I need it because I have this thing. Thank you. אני יהודית. אני יהודית, נכדתו של רבי יהודה, ששט על געגועיו בספינה מאיסטנבול, למות בצריף בו נולדתי. בין מחיסות לא כלום, מרצפות פרוסות על חול, התרוממתי, ירדתי עם נשימת האדמה. ביקשתי בשורשים המתפתלים הממירים מים ואור, לכהל הלימון, למתק השזיף. הרגתי ביללת החתולים, בהמיית היונים רעבתי למה? בטיפוף הגשם ברעפים רופפים, ידעתי את שקיקת הציפורים המפליגות. גאיתי עם ניצחון הוואדי המשחיר הבולע, ולא ידעתי לאן.
I am Yudit, granddaughter of Rabbi Yehuda, who sailed upon his longings in a ship from Istanbul, only to die in the shack where I was born. With no separation from the world, on floors spread over sand, I rose and fell with the earth's breath. I asked the twisted roots, turning water and light into lemon flesh, into plum sweetness. I craved cats' wails and doves' calls, and I hungered for the drumming of rain on shaky clay roofs. I knew the desire of birds flying away. I swelled with the victory of the Vadi, blackening and swallowing all, and I didn't know where to.
To read more? Okay. So the second one. Okay. This poem is speaking also about my childhood. It's called בהיר brightness. בבית שקראו לו צריף, בחדר הכביסה, על קצות אצבעותיי ניחוח המצמץ של בגדי עבודה. אחפש בכיסך תמרים מתוקים שנשכחו. בעיר רצית. היית מעלה את האנטנה הכי גבוהה בשכונה, שתחלוש על שדרים נעלמים במרחבי הים התיכון, שתרחיק עד לאזמיר ולאיסטנבול. מה כבר יכלת לראות? בעיניים כלואות, משקפיים כבדי עדשות, לא ראית איש ואיש לא ראך. לא שארת איך חולמים בי הדי מלחמות השילוש הקדוש, יהודים, נוצרים ומוסלמים מסתערים, פרסות סוסים מתקתקות בחצי עיר רחוק. ערב יורד, צללית איש מצווה על אישה בשפה זרה, כומר, ושתי עיניי הלא שימושיות מחפשות, בהיר הן מבקשות.
Brightness. In the house, which was really a shack, in the laundry room, on my fingertips, the sourish odor of work clothes as I look in your pockets for sweet dates that have been forgotten. Brightness you wanted, and you used to raise the antenna the highest in the neighborhood so it could catch disappearing broadcasts from the expanse of the Mediterranean, as far as Izmir and Istanbul. What could you hope to see? Your eyes imprisoned behind glasses with heavy lenses. You saw no one, and no one saw you. You didn't consider how they knocked inside me the vapors of the wars of the Holy Trinity, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and the thudding of wild horses' hooves on half a far island. Evening falls, the call of a man commands his wife in a foreign language, Komer, and my two useless eyes look for the brightness they seek. And you can see this poem includes a snippet of Ladino.
Komer. Because the origin of my parents is not from Turkey, it's from Spain. The Jewish Spanish were deported from Spain in 1492. And after that from Portugal in 1497. Yes, we have a history, of course you have to. The third one, okay. Eloi HaMazkerot. This one called the God of Secretaries, and this one is one of my efforts to write about the reality of like this secretary of her day. איך אומרים היום יום?
The day to day.
The day to day, okay. אלוהי המזכירות. I need my glasses. אלוהי המזכירות אוהב אותן אותות פני מזכירה מול המראה. תופפות עם שחרית לעבר התחנה, מצופפות מונית שירות ליום מקסימום בשכר מינימום, מתפוגגות בחללים או צבא הצללים של הקדוש ברוך הוא. אלוהי המזכירות אוהב אותן מטות מבט למרכז בטנו. נס קפה, 2 סוכרזית, מעט חלב. אלוהי המזכירות אוהב אותן לוטות מבע ממלמלות. מיד, בוודאי שמיד. זה ממש אצלי עכשיו ביד. בבקשה. אלוהי המזכירות, מה אתה מבין במזכירות, במזכרים, בתזכירים? כשהיא מתאווה לפרוץ בריקוד הכי הזוי, אבל הילד שבבית, הילד שלה. אלוהי המזכירות, אינך מבין דבר במזכירות, כי היא עדיין מטפסת במדרגות לחיטתה, בחצאית קצרה ממידתה, שמה יד בקושי מכסה על התחתונים שאימא לא כיבסה. אלוהים, מה אתה מבין בתחתונים?
That's wonderful to hear. I'll just say that this translation includes a few of the translation issues we discussed before. It has the religious language and how do you move that in. And it also has the sounds that can be very, very hard to move over from language to language. And feel free to ask if you're curious. Okay, the God of secretaries. The God of secretaries likes them looking the part, making a secretary's face in front of the mirror, click-clacking at dawn to the station, stuffing herself into a bus to a maximum-length day at minimum wage, vanishing into office space, O army of shadows of the Holy One, blessed be He. The God of secretaries likes them looking away to the center of his stomach, Nescafe, 2 sugars, a little milk. The God of secretaries likes them dimmed, a quiet, unclear expression on their faces, muttering, right now, of course, right now, it better be here, right now, in my hand, please. O God of secretaries, what do you understand in secretaries, in supervisors, in memoranda, when she wants to burst out in the strangest dance, but the child at home, oh, her child, God of secretaries, you don't understand anything about secretaries because she still climbs the stairs to class in a skirt too short for her size, takes her hand and barely covers the underwear that mother did not wash. God, what do you understand about underwear?
Okay, ואני מדברת? But I don't need this one, I guess.
Oh, you don't.
Yeah. And this one, this poem, it's me speaking. This one is that poem that I told you about it, that I really wanted to put the reality inside poem, the walking in these little places and hour after hour, and that I was really angry on myself, and well, maybe it worked, okay, you can tell me. No, but it has, like, איך אומרים, הלחינו, 7, יש לו, כן, but 7, so I think,
melodies,
yeah, different melodies for this one, so I think it says something. כן, זו אני מדברת. שירות לקוחות שלום, זו אני מדברת, כן, במה אוכל לעזור? מצטערת גברת, אני יודעת שהמתנת הרבה בתור, לא, אני לא יכולה להעביר לאחריי משמרת. גברת, פה השיטה מדברת, אמנה, משובים על ביצועים, בונוסים למשאבים אנושיים מצטיינים, ובראש חודש משכורת שלא גומרת לחסות על שורשי השערות הלבנות. גברת, את לא שומעת שהתינוק שלך בוכה. זו אני מענה אנושי, מדברת אלייך, 24 שעות ביממה, 7 ימים בשבוע אנחנו כאן, אמה לאמה, מתחת לאדמה, מצאת החמה עד לצאת הנשמה, במקום שקוראים לו open space. מוארות נאון, ללא חלון, שירותים בפינה ואחראית שמאזינה וכונסת כשאני אונסת בצורה לא מנומסת את חבילת השקרים השווה לכל נפש. גברת, זה לא משנה מה את אומרת. התינוק שלך לא מפסיק לבכות. לכל איש יש תג מחיר ושקר מזהיר שמאיר את דרכו ממרום. במה אוכל לעזור?
It's me speaking. Customer service, hello, it's me speaking. Yes, how can I help you? Sorry, ma'am, I know you waited a long time. No, I can transfer you to the shift supervisor. Ma'am, here the system speaks. Labor agreements, progress reports, bonuses to outstanding human tools, and at the first of the month, a salary that doesn't even cover the cost of covering the roots of white hair. Ma'am, don't you hear your baby crying? It's me, the human representative, speaking to you. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we are here, shackled arm to arm, under the earth from sunrise to soul departure, in a place called open space, neon light without windows, bathrooms in the corner, and a supervisor listening, slapping me with a fine when I impolitely rap the pack of lies that applies to every being. Ma'am, it doesn't matter what you say. Your baby doesn't stop crying. Each person has a price tag and a lie that shines and lights his path from above. How can I help? And we'll close with a really short poem that I loved called The Loneliness of Loneliness.
Yeah, and you know, if we're speaking honestly about poems and writing poems, so this one, I tell you the truth, yes. Many times I thought it's, she is the person who chose this. Because it's really...
disagree about what
Because sometimes I can write something in 2 minutes and then I say it's not even a poem. So, okay, but...
Yeah.
So it calls בדידותה של הבדידות. שאספר לכם על כאבי הבדידות, על טעמם הפולש לחלקיקי הגוף. אבל אני אישה עירונית קשוחה, מהדור שלאחר שחרור האישה, מודדת לבד מדרכות מאובקות, נושמת סילוני פלטרילים, מרחפת בין המון פנים עלומים. מה לי לבכות כאבי בדידות? מה לי לבכות את בדידותה של הבדידות?
The loneliness of loneliness. Should I tell you about the pains of loneliness, the taste that spreads into the particles of the body? I am a stubborn urban woman from the generation after female liberation, sizing up the dusty sidewalks alone, breathing poisonous streams of fumes, fluttering between many anonymous faces. Why should I cry the pain of loneliness? Why should I cry the loneliness of loneliness? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a few minutes, and for those who would like to stay, a few minutes for questions.
Thank you.
Thanks for having you.
For questions about the poems, about...
Here it is.
Anything. Yeah.
Should we take the microphone?
אבל ה-question יכול להיות גם לך.
Touched upon it a little bit just in a few minutes ago. I'm curious about the relationship between you two as a writer and a translator, or and her translator. When do you negotiate? How does it work? Do you fight? Things like that.
Well, yes, הוא שואל אותי, כן? We never fought, right?
No.
Never. As I said before, I'm really lucky because at the beginning, Aviya, when she began to translate the poems, she began to ask me questions. And it was amazing how what I thought that is so obvious, it's really, really complicated. Not only to understand, more to לתרגם?
To translate.
To translate, because because in another language it's another kind of level and another kind of field, that you don't use this logical or many or cultural things. So I am so lucky because she was always asking me, as she said, sometimes she gave me few translation and she asked me which one is more correct.
It's closest. Like I would sometimes do 3 versions of a line or 4, and I would explain the difference between each, and we would talk about it and read it through. Something I'll say about translating poetry is readers always object to whatever you're doing. Like whatever you do, someone is not okay with it. Something I learned working with Yudit is sometimes what 99% of readers think, reading her line, is not what she meant. And I have to honor that. So once I understood that a lot of her imagery is personal, it's very interesting. It might not be the dictionary meaning or the newspaper meaning. It's her world, her childhood, her imagination, her dreams, and they repeat throughout. So what I did a lot is I tried to get as far as I could in my own, as far as I could, and then I came to her right with drafts, and I worked by hand, and I would give her a few choices for the lines, and I would explain what the difference is, and sometimes why something might be problematic in English. It might sound maybe the most obvious literal, but it's a problem in English for whatever reason.
Sometimes you can't find it. in the other language. There is no such bittui,
No expression.
phrasing, many things. It's unbelievable.
Exactly. So what do you do with that? Exactly.
You can't understand until you translate. You can't understand how difficult it is from so many reasons. Yeah, like culture, like language, like it's endless. And I am lucky, double lucky.
She also experienced previous
because she was not such a good translator. איך אומרים נאמן? Loyal, really, because honest, loyal, thank God. She was sorry, but I'm saying the truth, yes? But I even didn't know. Only yesterday she told me that she went to the old women in Shchunat Tikva and tried to understand what is this sheikh. It's unbelievable, and other things.
Right, because for example, I called my mother was Israeli, and the town that she grew up didn't have this kind of house. It didn't, and I was just like, I'm missing something. I don't know what I'm missing. I'm missing.
But it's only a word. Do you understand what she did with only one word?
But it's because she understood that word held an important place in the poetic corpus, in all of the poetry. And who is writing this poetry, right? It recurs.
Still, I believe it's unbelievable to take buses and to go to understand one word when you have the translation, because
so
you have it, the shak, you have it.
Whatever, I'll give you a couple of options, but none of them are shak. It's kind of interesting to see. Right?
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
And so I had to explain. I was like, look, because I knew I review a lot of books, right? So I know book reviewers are going to be like, no, it should be this, it should be that. So I was like, look, here is what this dictionary says, but it's not what I think you have. This is, so I don't know if that answers. Do we find, we really haven't disagreed. It's kind of interesting. We always in the end agree, and I think for both of us, sound is really important. That's something I really appreciate about Yudit. So you might look at a line and you're like, this is a little far. I don't understand why she's doing that. And the reason will be because out of the 3 or 4 possibilities, this is the sound that the two of us liked most. Because that's in a poem that's really important.
And that she is really interested in the real meaning. She is not trying to do something nice, or something. She really first want to know what I meant. So I had a few translator, and it never happened with none of them. So that's why I'm really happy and say that I'm really
and I'm really happy
blessed.
I feel the same. Like when you ask that question, when you write poems, you don't always think about all these things. But basically, Yudit has honored me by letting me go into her process. And it's very interesting. Like, what is another person's mind? I would call it another person's dream world. And that's not necessarily what a journalist might say. It's their imagery, their mental, how things connect in their mind, right? And that's what you're trying to get on the page. And it's a lot of fun. So yeah.
Thank you very much for this, for reciting this poem. It's amazing.
Amazing, right? Yeah.
I have one question regarding to your intellectual journey, or your how you started, and how actually at what point in your life you felt that all of a sudden everyone is talking about you in Israel, your poems becoming the reception of your poems becoming very important for Israeli public. Can you tell us, or about certain year, certain time in your life, or certain poem that actually transformed you from quite unknown poet to quite famous that everyone discusses, and Haaretz newspaper, Haaretz readers read.
Even Haaretz, that I don't send them. I don't send them my poems. But it happened. I can answer. Did you finish?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm jumping to you. It's very Israeli to jump into somebody's. That poem, it's me speaking. I think it was the most famous one, and it happened. That book, my first book, was published in 2009. I was 50 years old. It was in my birthday. Well, I wrote many years before that. I never even thought I had publications, but I never thought that, I don't know, sometimes there are people that write and do things and feel really good with themselves, but I am the opposite. See, I write a lot, I throw it away. I don't feel like something special or important. So, but this poem, it was before, in 2011, there were huge demonstration in Israel.
Yes.
And this poem, it was published a few years before, because this book was published at 2009, and so it really ran, and I think that's what put the spot on me, and all the names that social, justice and things like that. משוררת הפועלים, איך אומרים?
The workers,
the workers class poem they call it. So it's this one, but for me, I wrote all my life, but the real work for me was, as I said, when I was in my 40s, and I said I must write what is the reality of the day after day of the workers, but of course I must do it in poems, not and in poem it has to be many layers, like you see it has layers from the Bible, and the poem must have a subject and
yeah, a deep subject, like something underneath. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So that was my main work, and I say the truth, I was surprised when everybody says, "Wow, whoa, what this is?" Yeah, it surprised me.
And we should say that this book sold out of multiple editions in Israel, which in the poetry world is very unusual.
Yes, in any language, right?
And it won 6 prizes, not 2. Yeah.
Oh, I haven't updated. Sorry about that.
This is the one.
And hopefully more to come.
Yes.
Well, I'm waiting. You see,
the translation.
the truth is, the good thing is that the publishers, they send את הבקשות לפרסים.
Oh, the prize entries.
Yeah, and after that, I don't send.
Yeah.
Now I had 2 years. I never, the last one I have, I don't send it. It really disgusts me even to say, oh, look, how amazing am I. And this is one of the Malkodot reps to be a poet, because you have to sell yourself, and I don't sell myself. I never sold even one book. If somebody asks me, I give it. It's something personal, because all my deep thought and dreams are there. I can't take money for this. And I understand why poets take money, because they should survive. I understand it, but I can't. And that's why even my last books, I even don't send it for פרסים ומלגות. Yeah. Oh, the last one, איך קוראים ההוצאה לאור? Now I forget all my English, sorry, so I need there because I'm really nervous. The last publisher, they sent me before my third book, so it won something, but it was because they sent it, פרס מפעל הפיס. But after that, I didn't send it to nobody. I think it's really trap, to work for yourself and for its. So it's not spiritual at all.
Yeah. Let me say that's one of the awesome things about translating. Like, it's so much easier to write a letter to promote someone else's work other than your own, right? It's like things I would never do. So I find it was amazingly easy for me to write literary magazines and present Yudit. I could never do. So that's another interesting, freeing thing. It feels less cringy, you know. So that's a nice aspect to it.
Thank you.
Do you get letters or reactions from readers? Like
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. And there are some weight that I will publish, and yeah, but not many people read poems in literature at all. I think, but poetry, especially in Israel these days, and it's a little bit sad. Sometimes they say only 500 readers, that they are also the writers in Israel that read the poetry. Well, it's not a big fame. It's not a big fame. Like okay. Even now, those days, the two big shops of literature, the two big ones, they don't sell poetry at all. צומת ספרים וסטימצקי.
They don't sell...
No, I think we are decaying. ככה אומרים? Decayed?
Yeah.
They don't sell.
There are others, like independent bookstores in Tel Aviv.
Right.
Yeah. Only in this, in Tel Aviv, there are two my last book was only there, you know, in Tel Aviv, two, one in Jerusalem, things like that.
And yet poetry in Hebrew culture and Israeli culture has been so important.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, so many, there are school children who learn famous poems by Bialik, by Leah Goldberg, right? I mean, so it is part of the sort of the sensibility and the Israeli identity, and yet contemporary poetry is marginalized.
I want to say something sad, because I'm a teacher also. Something bad is happening in Israel, and even my students they don't understand the language. Yeah, that's what's happening.
Yeah. It's international.
The same in the United States.
Yeah.
Kids don't understand English.
Okay, so why should they like poetry if they don't understand what I'm writing?
Right.
It's really strange, but it's happening, you know. Things are happening. You think humanity will go forward, but we're going, yeah.
Yes.
So how like rising poets in Israel, they survive? I mean, how
Excuse me?
How like rising poets in Israel, young people who actually
Up and coming poets.
how they survive in
They don't survive from poetry, not the young and not the older. All the poets in Israel are teachers and things like that. I mean the famous one, okay? You can't survive at all, yeah.
Not just from writing poems and not just from translating either.
Yeah, and even only 3 writers in prose, you say prosa, only 3 are really can sell, and now they died, unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah, everybody dies, my goodness. מאיר שלו, עמוס עוז, בשירה מאיר ויזלטיר, אתמול מת יונתן גפן. It's like, איך אומרים שלכת? Autumn. I believe that it happens because not all of them were very old, yes? Some of them were 60s, 70s. I believe that it's the stress living in this country. Listen, I had twice cancer also. I'm survivor, yeah? Twice. And sometimes things that happen in my country, I go and everything, physically, my stomach is burning all the time. And when I came here, I came to my son, he lives in Boston for the last year. So I told myself, I'm wounded, I must heal myself, because it's not good for anyone. that I will go like burning all the time, but I couldn't, איך אומרים, לקרוע את עצמי מהניוז.
To tear myself away. Yeah,
So every night and morning I was reading and burning again. But I guess this what happens, because it's really strange that all the big authors and everybody's dying. Well, I tell you terrible things about Israel, and I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm making you depress you a lot. I'm sorry. Yeah. But really terrible things happen there, you know, like dictatorship and things like that. And so I'm sad, but I must say the truth about what's happening there.
Do we have any final questions?
I have questions.
Sure.
For the two of you, two things that struck me. One was the moniyot shirut, that you made it a bus, and yes.
That may be a mistake. No, that's a mistake.
No.
Oh, that's,
I was wondering whether this is an American scene of the help getting on the bus that
לא היה מזכירות, לא היה מזכירות.
that may be I didn't catch. Maybe that's.
הנה ביד שלך. אני חושבת שהכל קצת ועודך.
How else would you translate?
I don't know. It's one of the.
זה פשוט אין.
It's
It's some kind of a
That's the. But I was wondering whether also there was an American scene in your mind, and I wanted to ask you, Yudit, when you wrote Amale Amma, and when I read it first, I stopped there and I said, does she mean the length or the woman servant?
And of course, that's what, of course, I met both of it. Because that worker is a servant, and that's what I meant when I want to write a political poem. It's not like in prose that I can write. I must find sub meaning, and it meant, of course, both of them. And I'm lucky because Aviya knows the Bible, so she understands both of the.
I think I can answer your question. It's from sound. It's stuffing and bus. So we talked about it. Yeah, bidiuk. Yeah, so we talked about how do we get it, and we looked at the different options. But it's a similar thing. There isn't a concept, monichot. We don't have it in America, right? So an English reader, just to give you a window, what are your options? You can leave it transliterated in Hebrew, right? Transliterated, and then have an asterisk at the bottom. But I can tell you that readers object if you do it all the time. So I do it you'll see for Ladino, I felt it was important to leave the Ladino in. Okay, it's just so, because a Hebrew reader also will recognize that's not Hebrew. But this is a problem. For a Hebrew reader, monichot is nothing, right? It's a familiar word. So I actually remember, now that I'm looking at it, we discussed the options and we went with the sound. So, but it's the same thing, no matter what you do. For a translation, you can have a gloss on every word. You really can, because it's always a choice. But you can try it if you have it's a question of how much do you want to explain, and does that take away from the feeling of a poem? But if you have a better solution, I welcome it. If you have another idea, because you're right.
I thought about the scenes that the help getting on the bus.
Right.
That's an American scene.
It's a moment of cultural translation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think if you think about stuffing yourself, to me that is the monichot experience. It's not so right. So that's what you try and capture a little bit of. You can't get it. Unfortunately, with translation, you can never get everything. You just can't. So you pick what's most important. And I think the two of us, a lot of times, we feel it's sound. That's just, but not another translator would feel differently. We always end up, we usually agree at the end.
Because you are a poet.
Yeah.
So
Doing the Amma, did you say like
Let me see where that is.
arm to arm, so it lost the meaning, the other meaning.
Yeah.
You have to make a
See,
sacrifice.
you can't do both. Actually, I feel for anyone translating Agnon, because that's really, I actually think that Agnon translations should be sort of like the Talmud, is how they should come, with a commentary. Because, if you look at like Agnon stories, sometimes it's a line backwards and forwards. How do you translate that? Like, right? So what reader is going to know that you should be reading this backwards as well as something like that? So the translator has to pick. Are you going to go with the forward meaning, the backward meaning? Are you going to explain that you need to hint that it's from the Mishnah, let's say? So it's a bigger problem for a writer like that. And I think that's why there are no good translations, right, of Agnon, because you just have to explain so much. And what do you pick? But yeah, I mean, I always welcome comments and salute. If you have a better idea, like we welcome them, right? We welcome
Always,
ideas, always. Yeah. If you see something, but yeah, Monit Shaut is actually a perfect example. It's something that I think anyone who's been in Israel for, let's say, more than a week will know. But an American, we don't have
terrible
maybe
solution,
Uber pool, maybe. Yeah.
Can I?
Yeah. Ask away.
I have a very teeny tiny detailed
Sure,
question
see,
about
always-
it.
yeah.
Sukrazit,
Yeah.
that you translated as sugar.
in lots of
It
secretaries
was in
in the middle.
Elohei HaMazkirot. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Very good. Sometimes it's something that someone else objects, then you make the corrections and you make mistakes and no.
I mean, it gets the point across, right? But to me,
It's fine.
sukrazit,
No, you're right.
there's
You're right.
something about
Yeah,
the
yeah.
sort of the
Old
speed
person.
of the
But-
packing of the
but think of-
secretarial
you would probably do sweeteners.
sweetener. Yeah, something.
Would that be okay?
What would you?
Too long.
You see my problem?
Yeah. No, I think I.
You see the problem?
Yeah.
You're talking about something about sweeteners, certain amounts of sweetener.
Sweetener, two sweetener,
Two.
two
That doesn't
sweetener.
work rhythmically.
What you'd have to say like Splenda, like the
That's
brand,
the thing, but it doesn't exist in Israel. Like,
Right,
no one has
but-
Splenda in Israel.
but sukrazit would be the equivalent of like Splenda, like it's tablets of artificial sweetener, right?
It's possible, sometimes when I see something like that, I think it's possible that a previous editor, that happens
Changed
to
it,
me,
yeah.
and they say, we don't want it, we want it this way, and on the other hand, two sugars,
I prefer sugar because it catch the Aviya Yom-Yomit. It's like common to ask for sugar. If she will begin with these sweeteners and names that I don't know even, it makes everything more difficult. And the meaning was just to catch a picture that איך אומרים, המנהל מבקש. The manager asks you, and how she is, like a servant. Oh, yes, please, things like that. This was the important thing for me in this scene, much more than the name of the sweetener.
He's asking her to bring him coffee.
Yeah, of course, they are
Because if it were
gods.
the
It's
secretary
gods.
drinking coffee, I think the sukrazit
right,
means something,
But you
you
asked a
know?
good question.
Yeah.
I honestly don't remember our discussion over this line, but this is what happens sometimes, right? There may be, it means a sugar-free sweetener.
Right.
But Yudit might say, actually, or when you read it
The
out loud,
picture is
how about
much
this?
more,
This
yeah.
has got two sugar-free sweeteners. Do you see what I'm saying?
No, it
Right?
doesn't sound,
Yeah.
2 sugars.
In the translation, you lose the saccharine quality of it.
Yeah.
Right, so you lose the saccharin,
Yeah.
but you gain the dailiness. That's really important to Yudit. So if there's a better solution, we always welcome it. That's what happens a lot. Like, I might say, okay, this is what it means, and she might say, actually, what I mean is
To catch
the manager
a common
lording,
picture, common
the picture.
that happens all the time.
Yeah, so it's exactly. So you hear all the time people say, coffee, 2 sugar, right? That's you hear, like coffee, sugar, cream, right? But you're right. If there's a better way, I don't know. I kind of would go sweetener. I mean, that's what I would do personally. But I can't remember what we probably agreed at some point, or some editor changed. I can tell you for punctuation, a lot of times a literary magazine editor has objected to punctuation, and I've had a lot of discussions over those. So that might, I mean, just to get super technical, like you'll see Yudit's punctuation is not necessarily what might be common in contemporary American poetry. So sometimes I just say, okay, fine, because I understand it in Hebrew, but another reader might only has the English, so I'll usually acquiesce to that request. So if you're a Hebrew reader and you think the punctuation's weird,
That's why.
That's why. Yeah, I'll defer to an English only reader on those. Yeah, but great question. No, these are the kinds of things that we get all the right. Somebody's always like, "What is right?" All the
Why
time.
did you do it this way? Why didn't you?
No
do
matter
that?
what you do,
Yeah.
no matter what you do.
Well, I think that it's important that I will be glad, really, עם כל הענווה, כן? Because, and I'm really glad, so.
It's a good thing Agnon is not around to protest all of the bad translations of
I
his
feel
works.
really bad. Honestly, I feel really bad about that because he's such a great writer, and there's no. I don't know about anyone else in this room, but sometimes students ask me about that, and I have no translation to recommend. So I feel bad.
Learn Hebrew.
So maybe
Learn
it
Hebrew.
will be
Yeah.
Maybe get the Nobel Prize. They had to read him not in Hebrew,
Miracle.
right? They had to read him in English or Swedish.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, I mean, have you ever read some of these? It's painful. So I always think I never hear. I don't know about you, but I never hear an American writer discuss Agnon ever. I've never had that experience, and I think what a shame. Like never. And then when you look at the translations, you're like, I mean, I've had Russian-speaking friends will say that actually about Pushkin, which is very interesting. That American poet. It's not something that I'm super aware of, but they always point out that American poets never discuss Pushkin, and for Russians, seminal, right? So, and they feel it's because of the translation. I don't know enough to judge, but they feel strongly that Pushkin has not been served well. So, trying to serve Yudit, but right, exactly. Yudit's happiness for me comes from, like, she's the ultimate decider, like, because it's her inner, I don't know if that comes through, it's her inner meaning sometimes as opposed to what it means, which I know that sounds weird, but that's what poetry is. It's your internal meaning. Yeah.
Well, on that beautiful note, thank you both of you so much.
Thank you very much. You say the words. You're better than me. Thank you. No. Your English is
Thank you,
better.
everyone. It was so wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.